Okay, so I'm starting a new series today. It's going to be my Sunday series, and I'm going to call it Take Me to Church, even though that song is not at all about going to church. It's about worshiping at somebody's feet during a sexual relationship. But being that it's Sunday and many people are going to church, and what I'm going to talk about, it involves traditional church. It doesn't involve um, It doesn't actually involve anything like sexual relationships. Okay, if you know who I am, great. If you don't know who I am, I'm Suzanne Tidkemeyer. I used to write a column for Pathos called No Longer Quivering for over 10 years, where I wrote about quiverful churches. I wrote about non denominational evangelical churches. I wrote about the poisons and the traps inherent places that are high demand religious organizations, just a scooch away from CULTs. I can't even say that word because of YouTube's policies. But so I'm not saying the word. Um, it's one of those days. It's a very cloudy day here in Guanacaste, and when my eyes see clouds and I start to think about unpleasant things, I want to talk today a little bit. Well, first, before that, let me go back to my introduction and disclaimer. Please do not harass anybody I'm going to talk about today in any way, shape, or form. Don't even be rude to people who are opposing me in the comments. We don't go real life, and we are very happy to allow people other opinions. We just don't have to agree with them here. And we don't take on personal offense when people throw personal insults. We just don't do that. Also, these are my opinions. These are my thoughts on things after studying them for many years. It doesn't necessarily mean they're 100% rooted. In fact, you want to do your own research. I encourage anyone to do their own research on anything I'm about to talk about. So, disclaimer out of the way so that I can keep on going here and not get in trouble with the YouTubes. Today, I'm starting this new series, Take Me to Church. So I want to talk about one of the most pervasive traps that people, when you leave these non-denominational high pressure places, the things that can happen to you. One of them is you can leave, you can start to deconstruct, you can start to think about what it is you actually believe. Hit the bottom where the foundation is scoured clean and you're ready to rebuild, and then end up back at another high demand CULT like church. What do I mean? Well, I'm going to give you couple of illustrations. Those of you that know me really well know the poodle story. Um, the poodle story is a stupid one. It involved my former church here that I fell into, and I absolutely adored it. Okay. And then the pastor, a very righteous and godly man, offended some billionaire who began agitating after him. They threw him out and things kind of went haywire from there. And I ended up leaving because they decided that the needs of a visitor who was lying about her dog being a service dog in no way, shape, or form, it didn't have on a vest or anything. They tossed me, a solid member, over a visitor because I happen to be allergic to certain types of dogs undercoat. And the kind of dog this was happened to be poodle, and they're the worst allergens. But don't use that as comparison. I just want to show you that I fell into another church that was super toxic. It didn't start that way. Now there are a bunch of vaccine denying, healthcare denying, COVID denying freakazoids over there, and they just keep spinning into tighter and tighter circles. and I just don't know what to think. My husband goes to a church that I don't particularly care for much about it. I like the pastor, but I don't like the members. Most of the members are truly awful people, so I try to avoid them. So I don't go to church anymore. I stay home and I do my own thing. I don't need church all the time to have a good time and worship the Lord. But I don't want to talk about that as my main thing. The worst case of this I've ever seen was the case of somebody that I followed on social media, and I followed their case for a number of years. It was a guy by the name of Addam Swapp. Yeah, you may say, "Hey, why does that name sound familiar?" Because Adam was a Mormon fundamentalist. He was a member. He was part of the independent FLDS. He was a son-in-law of John Singer, who was a notorious polygamist in Utah, a place called Marion, Utah. And they Singer was shot in the back by local law enforcement while he was arguing with him. Did not get along with his neighbors. He didn't get along with the traditional LDS people in the area, and there was always drama. It started hard for Singer after he started homeschooling his children because no one homeschooled back then. He was a pioneer as far as homeschooling goes, but he also, like I said, didn't get along with his neighbors. There was confrontations galore until finally the police killed him in that area. And I don't want to get into that. I don't know if that's right or wrong. It does seem like the police react and go to guns frequently, maybe more frequently than they need to. But I understand they're dealing with some stressful situations. Law enforcement, not just law enforcement, but justice needs to be redone from the top down. I'm convinced of it. We've got too many people in jail in the United States. Well, Adam Swapp was his son-in-law who was married to two of John Singer's daughters. And he also did not get along with law enforcement, the regular Mormons in town, any of that. And he was convicted of building an incendiary device, a bomb, and he blew up the local LDS church there in Marion, Utah. And then he held police, FBI, ATF, and a number of other agencies. He held them off at a siege that took a number of days. And I remember I was living in Europe when this happened. This was late 80s. And we would hear about it, but it would be so far away. I didn't take in many of the details. Just crazy Mormon polygamist holds off FBI sort of thing was happening. So it wasn't until we got back to the States and I started following this television show that I loved, that I started to love, and started to follow the actors in different projects. One of the actors was in a made for TV movie called Siege at Marion. And it was about what happened when Adam Swapp held all these people hostage, well, his family hostage, his large family, and carried out this tremendous thing that took so much time in law enforcement. Eventually they got him and they shot him and he was sent to prison along with his brother-in-laws and various other people. I was curious about this after seeing the show and I started researching the case very thoroughly. I was very true crime at the time. I love to read about true crime. And so I kept watching the news. And every now and then, every 6 months or so, would do an update to see what was going on with that case. Eventually, Swab got out of jail. And I don't know at what point it happened, but he became a Christian. Now, when I started looking for this case and reading about it, I was still heavily involved in my former church, my horrible, high demand religious organization with lots of bad ideas that ended up doing things where they were part of groups that went to Bethel They took part in all kinds of weird healing beliefs and all kinds of beliefs about sickness and demons and crazy stuff. That was one of the things that finally forced me out. Was they went a little nutty with this stuff. They started harassing my husband, who was not down with any of this, and he quit to go to the local Methodist church. And I was going to stay there with my children, but I started being pressured to divorce him. It was one of the things that happened. And one of the members just pushed me too far one Sunday, and I quit, which led to over 2 years of harassment by various members of that old church. So all this was going on. I was every now and then checking to see what Addam Swapp was up to. And I was praying for him faithfully every day. He was on my prayer list with a zillion other people. I would pray that he would come to a redeeming knowledge of Christ, because at that point, our church believed that anybody who was taking part in Catholicism, the Methodists, Jehovah's Witnesses, and especially Mormons, and a cast of thousands of religions, different kinds of Baptist, Lutheran, whatever, they believed that all of those people were going to hell, that we were some of the few elect there ever were. And that always bothered me, but I was one of those things that I pushed down and I never said much about it while it was going on. Just thought, well, I don't know if I believe all of that, because I knew a ton of Catholic charismatics down in Louisiana. When I would go down there, those were the folks I'd hang around with. And I saw not anything different between what they were doing and what our old church was doing. So I'd been praying for him to come to a knowledge of Christ, and apparently he did. And because of his heroic actions during some sort of prison ride, he came up for parole and actually got it and came out. I was kind of surprised to see that, because a lot of times people that the government has identified as religious fanatics are gun people, because that was the thing they went after him for, was the bombing of the church and multiple apparently gun type violations, stockpiling weapons, as so many are wont to do now. If you stockpile major amounts of weapons, it does red flag the government, or at least it used to. So I started checking in more frequently, so it was doing there for a while, because he'd gotten out. And I was interested. I'm always interested in the second half of people's lives. I'm interested in what happens to people when they pick themselves up off the floor after very bad circumstances and they have to start again with their lives. That's always been endlessly fascinating to me. And it is a time of great hope. I've seen people do tremendous, miraculous things when that happens. I've also seen people just slide off and do bad things. But I was curious to see where he would go from this, because he had been so incredibly enmeshed in the FDLS culture, the whole culture of multiple wives, believe in Mormonism, all of that. And I watched him as I myself was deconverting. And I want to say deconversion is not at all like many people still in the church try to say. They try to say that deconversion is throwing away your religion, throwing away your faith, throwing away everything you believe in. No, it's not. You know, one of the things that Ginger Duggar has talked about in her book about leaving IBLP, she says it's not deconstruction, it's detangling, disentangling. Girl, disentangling and deconstruction are identical. You're taking what you know and what you believe, and you're sitting with it, and you're trying to figure out What do I believe? Do I believe? I'm sorry, we're having the most common Costa Rican thing ever. This is the beginning of Holy Week, and starting yesterday, we started having flickering electricity here, which is why I am recording this instead of doing a live stream because my computer has enough power to keep on going until electricity goes back, which it just flickers. It flickered 19 or 20 times yesterday. When everyone from San Jose shows up in Tamarindo, it strains the public utilities to the breaking point, water, electric, and we get these flickering. So you may see the lights flicker on and off several times during this. Grab a drink. All right. So where was I? I was talking about second chances, putting your life back together and moving on. And Addam Swapp, he proceeded to do that in no short order. He paints, he does all kinds of things. But the thing that gave me pause and was pretty horrific in my aftermath of my deconstruction, detangling, as Ginger Duggar likes to say, is that he ended up running straight into the arms of John Piper. And I was just doing some reading on John Piper because I don't write for NLQ anymore. I'm doing my own thing, which means I don't keep up with these guys like I used to. I don't know what they're all doing. John Piper was part of the whole Council on Biblical Manhood and Womanhood. It's an organization that came up with soft have one of those days. Complementarianism. What is complementarianism? That is a softened version of the whole male female dynamic in patriarchy. Men rule, women drool. It is a theology that says that there are only certain roles for men and only certain roles for women. You've heard me talk about this on the regular here. I don't believe that. I never did, even when I gave it lip service. Why? Because I knew so many strong, powerful women that were the power behind the throne, not the guy. The guy was bumbling along, doing it wrong, and the woman was coming behind him, bless her heart, and fixing everything. So I don't even think that the women of complementarianism believe it. They don't believe it. They don't believe in gender roles. They may say they do, but they're doing it. They're doing it behind the scenes. And that's the reason I think that people fall into quiverful is it's a system that promises your husband will be turned into this mighty man of God if you just believe and pray a certain way and give him children and stay home and do all of the things that patriarchy demands. Too bad it doesn't work, and women have terrible breakdowns eventually. So many of them do. So there's that. So John Piper taught this hard for eons, okay? And I see now looking at his website and at Wikipedia, his Wikipedia page is all kinds of disgusting. There's no criticism, there's no pushback on any of his ideas, there's no counter. It just talks like it is a slick PR brochure about him. And it's interesting because everything about his involvement with the Council of Biblical Manhood and Womanhood has been fully scrubbed away from that, and his website has all been scrubbed away. Curiouser and curiouser, I see. So he went and it was taught by John Piper, Addam Swapp did. He stayed married to one of the sisters, and they went, visited where John Piper was teaching, and went to his college so that Adam could get his theological degree and become a preacher. And that's what he is doing now in Utah. He's preaching, I think it's Fairview, Marion area, and promoting the ideas of patriarchy. Definitely not what I thought when I was praying for him all those years ago would happen. But definitely the thing I was giving lip service to in those days. So here we have him doing all that. And in the meantime, I don't know what happened behind the scenes with John Piper. Can only speculate. But he is no longer teaching like he was. He's now in Tennessee. He's not a pastor. He's not a senior pastor. He just seems to be the guy that goes to church somewhere. And he writes a ton of books still. He's a prolific writer, even if a lot of his ideas are utter codswallop. They're just utterly ridiculous. So I'm fearing for Adam at this point because he's fallen into this thing, this non-denominational, high-demand religious organization thing. And as a pastor, I've seen a lot of them bring them in, burn them out. I've seen that so many times in the old church, everything else. Even the pastor that I sat under my old CULT church, he burned out and ran off elsewhere. And he was less toxic than many of the members. So I have compassion for pastors. It's a hard life. It's something I could never do. I used to want to be a pastor at one point. I know what you're going to say, Suzanne, how could you be a pastor at one of these places? Well, no, I was thinking the Methodist Church where you are allowed to be a pastor, but I've since changed my mind. No, I don't want to work that hard. That's all it is. So in my mind, Addam Swapp has gone from CULT to CULT. And we all have that tendency, is what I've found when we leave our old churches, particularly if we are trying to sit on the pew somewhere else and recover, which is a good idea, bad idea. If you fall into the wrong place, what will happen is worse than what happened with Swap. You will end up crushed on the tines of whatever this thing is, because eventually the same things are going to happen again. And you know what they say about the definition of insanity is repeating something over and over again and expecting different outcomes. That does seem to be the thing about insanity. It does, yeah, it's kind of that way. It's kind of insane to keep doing the same things. But so many of us find ourselves doing these same things. I know I have off and on since I left. I wish I still had my paintings from the US. I had a painting I did one time that showed how I thought, how I felt when I left my old cult church. It was a picture of a mountaintop, and there were white sheep on the top of the mountaintop dancing around. At the bottom of the mountaintop was a fence, and there was a sheep behind that fence, one single solitary sheep looking up at the sheep on the mountain, envying them, wanting back up there, but prevented. That's how I felt for so long. I felt like I had been taken outside the camp and abandoned. And it was kind of odd because I tried to talk to all of my friends from those days and say, hey, I'm no different. I'm just going to the Methodist church with my husband. And it was kind of a weird time because Toronto and so many of these other conferences were giving prophecies that the next breakout of revival would be through the Methodist church, which is kind of odd because I never saw that in my time at the Methodist church. I saw a lot of people coming in from these taco churches, totalitarian, authoritative church organizations, the kind of churches I've been studying and talk about within LQ. I see so many of them come in from there and then try to change a Methodist church to be just like the places they left. I saw lots of that going on the 10 years I was at the Methodist church. But the church stayed grounded around what they preach: open hands, open hearts. And I have to tell you, I appreciate that. If there was a Methodist church anywhere near here, I would be there in a heartbeat. And you know that I tell you in free from these religions to go to the church of your youth and sit on the pew and let yourself decompress for a couple of years Don't attempt to join any ministries. Don't do anything but soak in and heal. But what if the church of your youth was a CULT church? That makes it a little more problematic. You probably don't want to go there and do that. Then you want to find a very straightforward, level headed place where no one is going to throw crap at you or call you names or hint that you're somehow not as good as them spiritually because you're on your deconstruction journey. And I'm not saying that deconstruction can't lead to a reconstruction because most of the time it does. The thing it leads to is a cleaning off of the foundation of the house and a rebuilding in a healthier way. And many times that means that we end up at another organization that um, is healthier. Sometimes that's church, sometimes it's not. But most of the time it is some sort of faith in the faith and spirituality most of the time, not all the time. And I know people who go through huge times of being an out and proud atheist that end up coming back to the church. It's all good. But if you end up in a place again that is a CULT, you're going to suffer. It will happen again and again, and you'll be looking at yourself in the mirror going, what is wrong with me? Nothing's wrong with you. We all want to return to those things that are familiar and kind to us. No one wants to get hurt. We go back to those places that have pangs of being comforting because we know what it is. And we may not know it's a CULT church at that point, but we feel comforted. We feel comfortable. I have to tell you, the first 6 months to a year that I was at the Methodist church, I felt so uncomfortable every single Sunday. I felt out of step with everybody. It was just not pleasant for me. And it wasn't anything to do with the Methodist church. It was me. Part of me was having the spiritual icks, throwing up, because I was hearing things that were contrary to all the stuff that I'd been taught at the old CULT church. That, while my head knew that they were preaching truth, my heart was grieved and I was just like wanting to throw up because it was so different. You can't change your thinking overnight when you leave these places when you're recovering. This stuff in here goes nowhere for a long time. And I've talked about this before that when you make that transition, you have to do kind of an exercise every single time you get an old church thought, when you get a thought. What do I mean by that? It could be simple things. Could be you see women on the beach wearing G-string bikinis, thongs, and you're thinking, look at that sleazy, slimy SULT. And you know that in your heart of hearts, you know that person is not that way. Your first reaction from having spent all those years in that place, your first thought is might be that one. Or, I can't believe how immodestly that woman is dressed. She's going to hell. When those thoughts, those pesky, pervasive bedrock thoughts happen at from these places, and you don't want to think or feel that way anymore, and you realize that that's wrong, you have to turn and face that thought and say, no, that is not true. That person is valuable. They are loved by Christ, or they are a good person. You are judging them based on an external. You have to take whatever the lie is and tell it the truth. That is so helpful, I found. And after a while, your mind starts to go, oh, yeah, the truth of that is XYZ, instead of automatically going into cult thinking 101. It's not an easy task to reprogram your brain like that, but it's an important one if you're coming out of those kinds of places. And if you don't do it, you could beat yourself up. You could have all kinds of things going on. You could have such um, dissonance in your soul that it's hard to do any recovery at all. It's hard to love yourself and to stop judging yourself. It's hard to forgive yourself. And we have to forgive those people and what happened to us. We have to start by forgiving ourselves. Because if we don't, we're going to end up stuck and we're going to end up in another one of those places and we're going to fall for the garbage. Know that you are more valuable than that and don't fall back into these kinds of places. For me now, when I see the first whiff of this, I am gone. It's like, no, talk to the hand because you ain't talking to me. Now, here it's a little more difficult for me to find a church because there are only a handful of churches in Tamarindo area. The one we came from that was good and went bad, that fell into CULT territory. There's another one nearby that my husband goes to that has those leanings too. There's one down the road from us that I like the pastor, I like his wife. I like some of the members. Some of the members are former friends of mine from the old church, but I don't like what's preached. I don't like the fire and brimstone that this particular pastor likes to use. That's his go-to move, and it's not always very welcoming. And I think you're going to run off more people than you save by doing that. And I'm just not a fan of that style of preaching ever. I don't think that making people feel guilty is a good, godly thing. It just isn't. So don't fall into those places. Don't fall back into those ways when you leave this place. And stop beating yourself up. Love yourself. Forgive yourself. Give yourself the space to heal. And don't put yourself back into those places where you're getting hurt again and again and again. All it does is harden your heart. Okay, you guys. Love you guys. Hope you had an awesome weekend and you have a good week going into the week. Tomorrow's Monday again, and it's the Monday of Holy Week. I like to do observances on Holy Week. I still like to do that. And I talked about that just a hair yesterday. My son and I would watch Jesus Christ Superstar and sing along and act out the parts and things. And I miss him for that. I miss him doing that with me. And I probably will watch a movie a few times, or at least once this Holy Week. I like to do Bible readings on what's going on this week. Christ steps towards the cross. I cannot imagine being that kind of sacrificial for others, knowing that he was going to die. I can see why Christ had a dark night of his soul where he's wrestling with it and talking to God. Any of us would, but most of us would sneak away. Even if we got swallowed by Jonah's whale, we would do that. Very few of us would be that sacrificial. My husband was watching about Chernobyl earlier, about some of the people that helped out in the initial days that knew they would die to do this and sacrifice themselves for the good of the people. That is a noble thing. It's not an easy thing. And when I think about the sacrifice of Christ, it just breaks my heart in so many ways and blows me away at the same time. So even not attending church, I feel the need to mark this week and to look at the true cost that was paid. Okay, you guys, I'm definitely really going this time. And I may do a video this week about Holy Week. I may do a Holy Week um, vigil with different prayers and talk about the parts of the Bible and just go from there. I think been thinking seriously about that or doing a video tomorrow, the next day about Holy Week. And also Tuesday, I'm going to try to do a Taco Tuesday so we can talk about these things. But I think for now, I'm going to do recovery and church on Sundays as well. I hate to see anybody fall back into the trap that they just left. It's kind of heartbreaking.